find people all the time. They got Fox watching the hen house. Customer service does it. Well, they're driven to get orders out the door, not to do the right thing. We've got trained teams that can do that.
Before we get started with the show, here's a quick word from our sponsor, Global Training Center. As trade compliance professionals, you want to make sure that your procedures and documentation are completed as correctly as possible to avoid any delays and possible fines. We provide a range of trade compliance courses that will fit your needs. From in-person or web training to recorded on-demand courses, we can train one or even thousands on your team through your learning platform or on our portal. We can even customize a private session for your team. Go to globaltrainingcenter.com to find out more.
Hey, Andy, it's crazy how the year's going by fast. I mean, we're already a couple of months into the year, and where has it gone, right? I mean, it's crazy.
Well, and there's so much, again, 2023 is not calming down in all the turmoil and different things that are going on with that. But that said, it's one of those things where, budgets are coming into play. People are somewhat overwhelmed when they're sitting down trying to do their planning for the year. And as they're looking at it, and they see all the objectives that they've already set or finalized or whatever they've got going. And as they're looking at it, they're also looking at the budgets, the economy, different things. So right now, I know a lot of folks are going for, bigger, better, faster, cheaper. With that, the scenario is, how can I expand my resources without adding money, if I can get away with that? And especially with the import compliance folks, import-export compliance, because the compliance area is kind of a lot of times treated as stepchildren. So it's almost, get out of our way, go do your thing and we'll call you if we need you, until the proverbial, what hits the fan. And then it's like, well, why didn't you tell us? And it's like they're overworked, underpaid, stressed out, underfunded as far as, or understaffed. So, there's a lot of that stuff going on. I of course, I imagine you remember some of those days yourself, Lalo.
Yeah, exactly. And, it's funny that you're saying that, because I think the more executives or higher ups listen to our show, they may realize, because it's funny how mostly every one of our guests have spoken to that, have said, take your compliance people into account when you're making this business decision, et cetera. It has to be part of the equation, and like you said, 2023 is not slowing down at all. In fact, there's probably going to be a lot more enforcement. CBP has a more experience in enforcing the Uyghur forced labor. The
Prevention Act, yeah.
Exactly. And the 111s and any of the other tariffs and everything, I don't see those going away anytime soon either. So, sometimes you just get overwhelmed and can't do it yourself, and you might need a little bit of help. So hopefully that was a good segue to our next guest.
Well, I'm looking forward to this one. It's just for folks today. We've got a couple folks on that from Vigilant that are John Mack and Joe Burks. And Joe and I go way back. We're really, really good friends.
Yeah, we've been doing this for a long time, Andy.
we sure have, and we've got to talk through some tough times with both of our families at times and things and going on and whatnot. And by the way, I don't know if I told you, but I'm a grandfather now, so that happened way back in December. So
greatest thing ever.
Yeah,
Andy.
Thank you. Oh, I'll tell you what, it's like as we would say, I'm giddy as a filly on a spring morning with that one, but I'm just elated. But for our listeners, actually, I'm looking forward to this conversation because both John and Joe are very knowledgeable in the industry. And I'm going to throw a couple things out here is that, first off, Joe, welcome to our show. And John, to you as well. Thank you so much for coming on board with us.
Thank you.
Andy,
glad to be here.
Appreciate you having us.
Oh, sure. Well, thank you all for coming on.
Let me throw something at you here, buddy. You kind of heard us probably talking in our intro here is in talking through some things with what Vigilant in a nutshell. What Joe? What is it that y'all do? And then we'll go from there because I got a couple of questions I want to throw
Oh,
at
no
you.
problem, Andy. Vigilant is a provider of global trade management managed services. So we actually help companies run their trade department. And what makes us different is we dedicate staff rather than having a bullpen and throwing it over the wall. What makes us different is we dedicate a person to your account and they learn your business and they become an augmentation of your trade team.
That is phenomenal. All right, so here's the thing with what you're talking about there, and it's managed services. So I get that. If you're an executive of a company or in middle management or above or whatnot, and you're sitting there looking to say, what can I do? You've got more things out here, and one of them mentioned the Uyghur. What is it?
Forced Labor
I've just gone
Prevention
blank.
Act.
The Thank you. I started to say slave labor. It's not
It's
that.
kind of the
It's
same thing, yeah.
anti-slavery. It's basic. Yeah. The act that is in effect. Other initiatives are going on. Basically, is with all the things that are happening, enforcement is ramping up. So if you're an executive, you've got to look at it from a standpoint, how can you minimize your risk? But you've also got to look at things to say, not only minimizing your risk, but you got to take care of business. So as a whole, as I'm looking at this, Joe and John, I guess I'm looking at it as like, where is it that whether it's with Vigilant or some other provider out there, is that where would be the opportunities for a medium to large size company that could probably come back around, and maybe even a small company for that matter, but where somebody like yourself, a service provider that could help them take care of the day in and day out type business activities and allow them to use their higher expertise folks to be focused on things they need to be doing rather than pushing paper.
Sure, Andy, without a doubt. I mean, it makes a lot of sense. And, you alluded to part of the problem we're starting to see with CBP doing more enforcement actions. I read more and more every day about new enforcement actions or special programs or teams that have been set up to do that. And the value in Vigilant is we bring knowledgeable people to help you do that. We take the reactionary work so you can be proactive. And that's key because what we do is we do that repetitive day-to-day business, such as your HTS classification. That allows your people to be more proactive and start looking at a lot of this Forced Labor Prevention Act. And, we talked briefly or mentioned briefly about the new study that Biden's doing on export controls and how U.S. products are getting into drones going into Russia. So how are they getting those products? And customs is going to start asking more and more questions of the general importing and exporting base. What are you doing? How are you doing? Do you really know what you're doing? I think the third thing is that we bring a set of tools with us that are tried and true. We'll use different systems that are deployed. Now, we don't have a trade management system that we deploy. We've got partners that have those, but we've got many different tools that we use. One such thing is your military end use that's starting to become very big. A lot of it's in China, Russia, Venezuela. How do you know who you're selling to in China? What are they going to do with the products? And we actually go through and do a see-through on that and say, well, your customer over in China, where do they get most of their revenue from? And what happens if it's any technology that's going to China and the end use is in the military, or they get most of their revenue from selling to the military, you better watch your controls on those exports, okay? So we can supply your people with that type of information for them to make better decisions and work with the management on how to keep goods flowing but stay compliant.
That's excellent, Joe. And I
So
think
what
Andy,
you're
to further to that, to your point, when the laws are constantly changing. Joe has said numerous times one of the greatest things he loves about this industry is that as soon as you learn something, they go and change it, right? So that's
yeah.
the fun complexity of the world that we live in. But why don't we can allow our customers to focus on making their widgets and leave the compliance to
Mm-hmm.
us, whether that's a detailed analysis on this Forced Labor Prevention Act, or just even a classification project, or denied party screening. I mean, it's critical for these customers to know who their customer is. Know your customer. You can't be shipping stuff all over the world.
John, I guess that you're hitting on something though that I was going to ask. So it's like what you're looking at is being able to provide resources and staffing for a specific project or a specific timeline, or is it just always ongoing? Or I'm hearing it's more project based in one
It could
respect.
be. I mean, that's the thing.
Is
We can. That's the. I mean, Joe. Correct me if I'm wrong, but I think what makes us unique is that we can be nimble. So we can. Andy, if you have a one-off project, we could look at taking that on for you. I mean, or we can be as integrated and be a part of your company. I mean, we have accounts where we use their provided equipment, laptops, and sign into their systems. We're effectively an employee of that customer, or we can work with a partner and act on their behalf a similar partner that can't handle the workload. So they have a monstrous project, they could give that to us and we can work on it for them and pass through. So it's anything. That's what I think is so exciting about what we can provide. Whatever the solution is, we can try to find a way to help you out.
Yeah, and
okay. So here's something. Go ahead,
understand
Joe.
one more thing there, Andy, is we are licensed customs brokers. We don't file entries and we don't have a filer code, but we are licensed to conduct customs business. And that's something we're seeing customs do more and more. There's been a couple of decisions lately that says,
Yes.
wait a minute, you want to do classification from Canada? It's customs business and you can't do it from Canada, okay, unless you've got the proper oversight. Well, with Vigilant, we are using U.S. resources and tools to be able to do that work, and we're licensed and acknowledged by Customs and Border Protection to conduct that work.
Mm-hmm. But if you're an executive, Joe, of a company, what do you recommend, or Joe or John for that matter, for preparing somebody, if you're wanting to consider outsourcing some functions or bringing in you guys for a particular project, chances are there is a compliance group that's already there, and yet they're already stretched thin, or they're not. Maybe they don't have the expertise, but they may feel like they've been around there for a long time and whatnot. Do you have any suggestions for an executive or upper management in preparing to bring in a company like Vigilant or some other vendor to take on a scenario?
Yeah, well, I want to start off there, Andy, by saying, I've been doing this for 35 plus years, and question executives always say
Go.
is how many people can you get rid of? And one guy I worked for would say it's butts out the door. How many butts out the door? And I would look at him and I would say, look, it's not about butts out the door. It's about maintaining a level of compliance. You're not going to give me unlimited labor to remove all risk, and rightfully so. But what we have to do is get companies to understand is that it's about reducing that risk, and what that biggest risk becomes. That's where Vigilant comes in. Allow us to do that daily work for you so you're not bogged down within that restricted party screening. We find people all the time, they got Fox watching the hen house. Customer service does it. Well, they're driven to get orders out the door, not to do the right thing. We've got trained teams that can do that. Classification, the same type of thing. Then it allows their teams to be more proactive
Effective.
and dig into the details of these new programs that are coming up. Andy, you were on one of my episodes of Trade Buzz with Joe. And what I do with Trade Buzz with Joe is we talk about a lot of those issues that's coming up. Just did one a couple of days ago that talked about the changes to 19 CFR Part 111, the broker regulations. And a lot of importers are going, hey, no big deal, no big deal. What they fail to realize is there's a section in there on brokerage oversight that says if you've got a customer that is doing something wrong, then you have to write a letter to them and put it into a file and document it. Now, understand what that means by them making that documentation. If they happen to go to that broker and say, tell me about this importer, those records are now discoverable, and you have to look at those.
And they're not held in the client privilege or the attorney-client privilege, because of all that. It's a whole different ballgame. Yes.
And that's what it is. Well, it also, if you find, you take 3 or 4 months to go through and analyze the issue and do a voluntary disclosure, and they go, okay, did your broker know about it? Well, yeah, they told us 3 months ago. And they go, oh, wait a minute, you took 3 months to file this disclosure. What is it? The value that we bring is we have all that data behind the scenes to help you with that. And then we do that day-to-day work so people can focus on making sure that they understand the implications of those regulations. They're working with their brokers and making sure there's no issues or concerns. A lot of times, because trade is always stretched for resources. It's just a fact in the industry.
Well, to your point I think you hit on something, though, is that by outsourcing the day in and day out type functionality, compliance, or even a customer service type thing, or checking some things out that you're able to do, it would free up the staff to now apply their expertise into areas within that company. They know their company, and they can navigate within there probably better than you or anybody else for that matter, but it now frees them up to apply that expertise that they know of internal to the company, so that they're now more effective in their compliance role. So that I see that as a phenomenal thing, and that's one of those where in talking through with these clients, I guess the other scenario here is and then, John, let me throw this at you, I guess, is that in the things that y'all are doing, whether it's a special project or not, are you able to help your clients reduce exceptions?
Yeah, I would. Yeah, absolutely. Because to your point, Andy, focus on making your widgets. Leave the compliance to us. We're the experts at it. You don't need to try to boil the ocean. We already. Joe, for example, has probably forgotten more than most people are ever going to learn, quite frankly. So, yeah, absolutely. We can help reduce, potential risk by helping support their internal staff, not replace them, not butts out the door, but support them and let them focus. We had a conversation, Joe, who was the gentleman right before Christmas, where he was in the same boat. He's like, I'm a one-man show, and maybe he has a couple of people working for him, but I'm drinking from a fire hose. He's like, I don't know what I don't know. And we just went through our basic presentation, and we discussed, and there were at least 2 or 3 things that the light bulb went off. And he's like, you could help me here. You could help me here. You could help me here. And so it's almost, I don't mean to speak for you, Joe, but I think sometimes, working with our customers is almost like you can see like almost a sigh of relief. They're like, oh, okay. Thank goodness I can get some support, instead of me trying to do it all myself, and that's, and I'm new to Vigilant. I've been here about 7 months at this point, but that's a consistent theme that I've seen with the people that we've spoken with. People need help. It's people are busy, people need help, and the regulations are changing. The world is changing, and not necessarily for the better sometimes. And so, your compliance is critical to your business, and we can be an extension of your business to do it for you.
Hey everyone, we're getting ready for another annual ICPA event coming up the week of March 12th in Orlando, Florida. If you have been thinking of attending any of the ICPA conferences, this is the one you should not miss. There will be more sessions than any other conference, with a guaranteed sellout, so hurry and get your tickets today. We are also excited to share that Simply Trade podcast will be in attendance, and we want you to be part of our show. Listen to episodes 14, 15, and 16 to find out why you can miss this conference.
Don't know that I could have said it any better.
Well, I
Andy.
see where.
Wow.
Yeah. Well, I was just going to say is that it's where, you know, in what the services that y'all are not trying, but do provide, it's you're coming alongside the compliance. You're not taking
Yeah.
over. You're not trying to, you know, kick them
By
out
no
the door.
stretch of the
You're
means.
coming alongside them.
But imagine you're the executive on the C-suite, and you had 10 containers come in that were made with Uyghur cotton, and your compliance team didn't do their due diligence, and every single one of those containers has to be either destroyed or re-exported, and you got nothing to sell, and you got how many months of a supply chain?
And you've already paid millions of dollars, probably, or hundreds of thousands of dollars.
I mean,
and
that's a
and it's
tough
just gone.
conversation to have with the brass, I would
Yeah, but I
imagine.
would like to expand on that, John, is because one thing, and Andy, you've seen the little wheel that I have. Trade compliance, they don't sit in their own little kingdom. They actually have to work with every department within the organization. Trade doesn't understand
Right.
that cotton is Uyghur cotton. They have to work with the supply chain team to make sure they understand what those rules are and create a partnership that says, hey, here's the additional vetting questions that you need to add when you go to certify a vendor. You need to add these to your contracts that you sign with the vendors that say, you know, you can't use any Uyghur forced labor, whatever the case. And that's even from an export side as well. And that's something that we need to see more and more of. But trade encompasses every department in an organization. Okay. Trade is not an island unto its own. In a past life, they were looking at changing the source on products to Brazil because the vendor says, oh, yeah, you can use GSP. So supply chain manager came to me and said, you know, hey, is this eligible for GSP? And I looked up the HTS and I go, yeah, but you also have to make sure that your vendor understands, because it's explicitly stated in the GSP regulations that the vendor must agree, if so asked by Customs and Border Protection, to open their books so they can prove that so much of the growth of that product was for that beneficial country. And when I went back to the supply chain manager with that and gave him the statute and the regulations, the vendor goes, no, that ain't going to happen. And we didn't end up sourcing because they would have to add for that additional risk. They weren't interested in opening their books to anybody. And quite honestly, we don't know where they were getting all their products from. Were they just importing it and assembling it there, which goes against what GSP is, right? Generalized systems preferences is designed to benefit underdeveloped countries. And if they're just importing it and assembling it, that's not really benefiting that country. So that's the thing that.
Well, there's another one. It just as you're going to go, Joe, is like, for example, the NAFTA 2.0 or the U.S. Mexico Canadian agreement, USMCA, I think is what we call it here. But that's another great one. There's a lot of manufacturing, obviously, going down to Mexico, and a lot of components are still coming from China. So they'll do the assembly or something, and they go through, and the USMCA regs say that now that it's up the percentage of requirement for North American country of origin for the goods, the raw goods. And so there's that, plus, there's a lot of China components that come in, and they're getting hit with the China tariffs, because the 301 tariff, because it has so many China components in it. Well, that still comes back to, well, how do you vet that, and how do you look at these products and zero in? You got to have resources to be able to deal with that, not only on a specific project, but then also on a day in and day out basis.
Yeah, Andy, not too long ago, there was a manufacturer that made their product in China. They got hit with the 25% 301 duties. So somebody had the bright idea, well, let's just pick up that assembly line and move it to Mexico. Yet they still brought in all those raw components from China. Well, the government got into it and they said, well, okay, well, let me apply for a ruling. And they were quite disturbed when they found out that, yes, it was eligible for free trade agreement. So it had zero normal duties, because it did qualify for USMCA, but they still considered it a product of China and was subject to 301s. Now, it's counterintuitive, but those are the things that we're starting to see in the industry anymore. You know, the whole idea was to put these additional duties on stuff from China, and people are trying to find ways around it. And rightfully so, they should, but they have to make sure they're doing the proper research so you don't end up with the repercussions of the cost of moving that line only to still get impacted by the 301 duties. You talk about that granite countertop. The idea is, you know, and I've done this in past lives, is where it's not only working with the supply chain team, but do you get with the designers, the engineers, and say, hey, wait a minute, is there a way that you can call this cabinet out and the granite countertop as a separate line item and price them each? Because if you integrate it into the cabinet, you're paying ADD on the whole thing rather than just on a granite countertop. So how can you tweak that design ever so slightly where now you're bringing in that granite piece that I don't know if it bolts on or whatever, but now you can bring that in and put it on once it gets to the US and only pay anti-dumping on that granite. That's the value behind, I guess, bringing everything around, is that by giving your trade people the ability to do that research and do that work, Vigilant is the one that does that day-to-day task, so they're not having to focus on classifications or restricted party screening. We do that so they can now look at duty-saving opportunities.
And Joe, we previously had a guest on our kickoff show, on our first show of the year, who very well put. I mean, George Tuttle, he very well put it this way. He said, where it used to be that trade was a matter of filling out the right paperwork and getting it in across borders, et cetera, it's now, trade has now become a barrier. You know, now you get these regulations and you know, like anti-dumping or the Uyghur and all that. And so it's now a barrier, and you now need to know how to deal with those barriers. Whereas again, you know, before, yeah, you had someone that knew very well how to fill out the Sandy 501, you know, which is fine and dandy, but you never know what's going to get you in trouble. That's behind that.
Without a doubt, Layla.
Yeah. So anyway, I just like that fact, and I like the fact that you can look behind the scenes and maybe have the staff, the in-house staff, fill out that paperwork where when you're helping them make those decisions in the background.
Yeah, well, creating that partnership is very important. And Andy, you know, we've talked about this at ICPA for years. You've got to create those partnerships, because what happens is you build that trust, then they'll come to you and ask you proactive questions rather than you having to find the problem and go to them and go, wait a minute, I didn't know this was happening, because that's when you're in trouble.
All right, so let me ask you guys, is that if somebody's looking at this and going, all right, you've got me hooked, this is an idea that I want to talk a little bit more on, I'm not prepared to sign a contract yet or whatever, what do you suggest that a leader of a company, executives of some kind, what should they be looking at before they even reach out to you to say, should they learn what their business is, what their processes are, or whatever, or in looking at it so that you can look to see where the opportunities are, or what do you suggest?
Without a doubt, Andy.
Follow up a little bit more.
Yeah, and without a doubt, one of our offerings is what we call an assessment, where we'll come in and spend a couple of days with your folks. And the value, and I mean, your folks can do that internally. The problem is that they may not have the depth of experience to be able to ask the right questions. Over the period of years, we've developed a script where we talk to all the departments and start asking questions. But the other thing that we do is we also validate, in the sense that, well, here's what supply chain said, but does receiving agree with what supply chain said? We'll ask the same question, But what that does is it starts to show where the things that they need to do to improve their trade program. So it's all in all it's a great thing. And that's what we get a lot of customers that want to do that. And then we write up where the shortcomings are, and then they can go off and fix it, or we can help them fix that.
All right, guys. Any last words to wrap up today's show? This has been a good conversation. I'd love to do some more of this with you guys.
We're always here for you guys. So you just let us know. We'll gladly come on. If you have a specific topic, we'll do that. And I'm going to throw a shameless plug in for Trade Buzz with Joe.
Of course, I was about to say that. So I was going to say, Joe, we'll put links for you also on the show notes, so that people can get to the podcast. So just so everybody knows, Joe does also have a podcast that on trade, very different approach to what we do, but good information as well. So we we do recommend that you take a listen when you have a chance at his show as well.
Thank you, Layla.
Well,
John, any last words from you?
No, sir. I thank you and Layla both. Thanks for the opportunity. It's been a pleasure, and we'll hope you guys. We'll see you at ICPA here in the spring if we don't talk before then.
We will. Yeah, we will in March.
Reminds me.
Appreciate you guys bringing us on, and I think it's a great thing you guys are doing. It's like Trade Buzz with Joe. It's about informing the trade community about what's going on, and we work together as a team, and that's the key thing.
Well, Lalo, I guess I got to tell you, this has been a good show. I want to do some more with these guys here in the future, but
yes.
This has been a good discussion. Anything from you, bud?
No, I think this is it. I mean, thank you all, and we really appreciate that everyone listens in and growing our audience. So thank you all for following and commenting. And
all right, guys, thank you so much.
Thank you, gentlemen.
Thanks, guys. You take care. We'll talk to you later. Okay.
Have a good one.
Bye.
Bye.
Thank you very much for joining us. Simply Trade is brought to you by the generous contributions of Global Training Center. You can follow the show and GTC on LinkedIn or Twitter and other social networks. Make sure you check out the show notes in the description for a full rundown of today's show with all the important links. Also, make sure that you share this with a friend and subscribe on your favorite streaming platform. We really like hearing from you. If you enjoyed the show, make sure to rate and review wherever you listen to this podcast. If you or someone you know would like to be a guest on the show or would like to sponsor Simply Trade or suggest any topic you would like for us to discuss, please contact us via email at simplytrade@globaltrainingcenter.com, or you can DM us on Twitter at simplytradepod. Thank you again for the privilege of your time. Happy trading. Simply Trade is not a law firm or an advisor. The topics and discussions conducted by Simply Trade hosts and guests should not be considered and is not intended to substitute legal advice. You should seek appropriate counsel for your own situation. These conversations and information are directed towards listeners in the United States for informational, educational, and entertainment purposes only and should not be substituted for legal advice. No listener or viewer of this podcast should act or refrain from acting on the basis of information on this podcast without first seeking legal advice from counsel. Information on this podcast may not be up to date depending on the time of publishing and the time of viewership. The content of this posting is provided as is. No representations are made that the content is error-free. The views expressed in or through this podcast are those of the individual speakers, not those of their respective employers or Global Training Center as a whole. All liability with respect to actions taken or not taken based on the contents of this podcast are hereby expressly disclaimed.